The fixer turned foe. Michael Cohen finally taking the stand in Alvin Bragg's hush money trial against Donald Trump. The radical DA putting all of his chips in the testimony of a disgraced, disbarred, serial perjurer and convicted felon who was behind prison walls for 13 months. Today, the jury got to hear from a desperate and duplicitous man longing for Trump's approval and affirmation and would do anything for it, including taking out a home equity line of credit to take care of a situation for his boss, and secretly recording Donald Trump without his knowledge. Still no evidence of a crime yet. And Trump still gagged and unable to respond to his former attorney. But he had this to say.
Everybody's saying there's no crime. The sure respect DA Bragg, who turned down the case. By the way, he turned down the case. And it could have been brought 6 years ago, 7 years ago, almost 8 years ago. They bring it right in the middle of my presidential campaign. There's no fraud here. There's no crime here. This is 4 weeks of keeping me from not campaigning. The whole world is laughing now at the New York weaponized legal system.
Trump's lawyers haven't gotten the chance yet to dunk on Cohen's credibility, but they'll have plenty of material to work with, since Michael Cohen's about as sincere as people who say they like Greg's sweaters. Last month, Cohen said he would cease posting anything about Trump during the trial. Then he goes on TikTok to trash him, wearing a shirt that shows the former president behind bars in an orange jumpsuit and in handcuffs. Cohen's also trying to cash in by shopping this reality show called The Fixer.
My name is Michael Cohen, and for years, I was the personal lawyer for a notoriously bad man. Since then, I've been on a journey of redemption, working to set things right. But now I'm paying it forward, wielding the tools that I've learned for regular people in trouble. The little guy doesn't usually have access to people with my particular set of skills.
All right, Greg, you're laughing the hardest. You get to go first.
That was amazing, just seeing him do that. I'm very shiny, by the way. I don't know what's going on here. It looks like I just went for a big run. It's hard to poke. It does. I'm sorry. Yeah, but it's hard to poke holes in Cohen's testimony because it's all holes and no cheese. It's just air. And calling his show The Fixer, what has he fixed? I mean, he couldn't fix a parking ticket. Look at his career right now. It's like Jesse pitching a show on humility. Should be called The Rat, because he looks like a rat. Here, this is a lesson in lawfare. Where am I looking? Over here? This is a lesson in lawfare. Once they set their sights on a target, it's just like regular warfare, meaning they end up acting worse and doing more terrible things and aligning yourself with more despicable, rotten people than the actual person that you are targeting. So you ask yourself, well, what's worse? Trump taking the lawyer's advice on an expense, or what the prosecutors are doing, which are using the felon who created the legal expense to imprison the defendant. In a weird way, they don't know it, but they're prosecuting Michael Cohen right now instead of Trump. But you know what I call this? This is the Queer for Palestine moment. You know those activists that hate Jews so much they ally with people who would happily exterminate them? Here, it's the court, the legal profession, Democrats, media allying with an obvious criminal and felon to take down Trump. Never mind that it will ever stain everybody that's involved in this, because you couldn't pick better witnesses on behalf of Trump. There's no one can take this guy seriously. Even the guy that draws him is having problems. Also, one last thing. Yeah. It's amazing how the media, it calls Cohen's testimony at times bombshells. Oh, this is a bombshell when he brought up Melania. That was a conversation not recorded between this liar and Trump. So, A, shouldn't the bombshell be that they're talking about a privileged conversation between the lawyer and client? And B, you don't even know if it's true. Why are you reporting on it? They can't even explain the crime.
So this is following up the last star witness, who was a woman who gets paid to have sex with men on television. Katie.
Yes, I'm aware. Thank you.
Okay. She has sex on camera for money, Katie? You want me to
first,
explain it a little bit?
I don't need you to explain any further.
Okay.
And Dana's not here to hold your hand, so
Okay.
maybe I should step in for her to do that.
I'm in trouble.
But if you look at the testimony from today, there's not a lot of new that Michael Cohen is able to produce to the jury, not to mention reporters who are talking about this because we can't televise it. But coming into today, not a single witness has anything good to say about Michael Cohen. And then when you start hearing that he secretly recorded his client, who was Donald Trump, that just goes into his bucket of credibility as negative when it comes to someone that is trustworthy. If you're supposed to have attorney-client privilege, being able to trust your attorney, and then you secretly record them so you can then use it against them later, that's something I think most people say is a red flag for them. And I'm just surprised now that they've had Cohen testify, who went to prison for fraud, Stormy Daniels, who owes Donald Trump hundreds of thousands of dollars in a defamation case. I'm surprised they didn't bring out Michael Avenatti, who's serving prison for extorting Nike, given how much the media and the left upheld him as the one guy who can bring down Trump. And that's what they've been hoping for this week with Michael Cohen. We'll see if the jury buys it.
When do they teach you in law school, Harold, because I probably didn't go to law school, that you should secretly record your client?
I never took that class. It's good to be back around this new table. I would agree with a lot that's been said. I think Greg makes probably the most interesting point legally, and I'll be interested to hear the judge's reaction. The same set of facts, it seems like Mr. Cohen was tried on years ago or a while back. They're retrying him with the target now being President Trump, which I think is interesting. Two, it is not lost upon me. I heard a number of legal scholars today who were on different networks and our own network commenting about the taping of this conversation. There's no doubt. There's sometimes lawyers believe that they need to have something on record that their client may be saying or may be thinking about or may be posing to do, but you never tape them. You may have a witness with you. You may write it down yourself, but it is bizarre, if not illegal, to tape your client and then be able to play it back. I found that really odd. The flip side of it, the evidentiary path that they're trying to establish here with Cohen around whether or not these payments were made or what the motivation were for the payments. I didn't see all of it. I saw a lot of the transcript, or should say not transcript, I saw a lot of what was being written about, the reporting we have from the courtroom. And this is only direct. It seems like Cohen checked some of the boxes that the prosecutors might have wanted him to check in terms of establishing the motivation. I've not yet seen where Mr. Trump was in on all of this in terms of directing it all, but I guess some of we'll have some more of that testimony later. But as the judge and I think I can quote the judge on this, we thought pivotal last week and dispositive, and Judge Greg gave us a great definition of dispositive last week. Is he convincing, being Cohen? He is the key here. And if that jury believes him, on two fronts. One, that the reason that the president paid this money was because of the campaign advancement, and two, that he was in on all of it, then the jury is going to have, you understand now why the prosecution thinks there's something for the jury to answer. But all of this is really not fair for the president at this moment until the cross-examination happens. And as we shared last week, with some of the credibility challenges that have already been presented about Mr. Cohen, the cross-examination will certainly be interesting and incredibly intense.
All right, Judge, take us through what happened today, but beforehand, please tell us what dispositive means.
I don't know. Let me tell you something determinative, obviously. Michael Cohen is a man with a cause. He is a man without a company. He is a man without a law license. He is a man without a job. And he is a man who is desperate. So he needs a conviction. He needs for people to believe him in order to survive, because Michael Cohen has destroyed himself in all of this. The only way he goes forward in life is if he helps convict Donald Trump. The amazing part of this is, in order to do that, he will do whatever is necessary. So let's talk about the table being set here. The table is set. Michael Cohen comes in as the bully, the fixer, the guy who breaks things. That's why they need fixing. He comes in, quote, as a jerk, self-centered, a guy who's hated, and a guy who is screaming at people, prone to exaggeration, hostile, and throws a barrage of insults. That is what we have heard on the People's Direct case. What we know about Donald Trump from people who've worked for him is that it was fantastic working for him. That's a quote. That he was a really good boss, that he was a multitasker, that he was a hard worker, that it was great working for him. So that's your table. Now, you've got the main witness as Michael Cohen, the hated guy, going into this trial. This guy is so corrupt. He's not just a convicted felon. He is a convicted liar and a convicted perjurer. That is the essence of incredible. He should have a sign on his forehead that reads, liar, all right? Because we have defendants who go into court that we cross-examine them as felons, but you are per se unbelievable when you're convicted of perjury. Now, let's continue with this. He's incredible as a matter of law. He's a guy who goes in, lies to the bank, lies what he puts on the bank statement, the purpose of the LLC, says it's a retainer. Trump signed nothing. He has not put a finger on Donald Trump. It's just like Stormy Daniels. He hates Donald Trump. Stormy hates Donald Trump. And so at the end of the day, the question is, if there's a conversation between Alan Weisselberg and Michael Cohen, what does that have to do with Donald Trump if Donald Trump didn't sign anything or was not part of the conversation? And I'll tell you another motivation for Michael Cohen to lie and try to destroy Donald Trump. What bigger insult is it to have worked for Donald Trump as his fixer, as Michael called himself, than to not be invited into the White House? Do you know in Manhattan with all his friends, he says, I'm going to the White House. Donald's the president. I'm probably going to be his counsel. Is this, is that? Donald Trump knew not to invite him. Donald Trump knew not to make him part of the team. Donald Trump knew exactly what he was. And finally, this is a one-on-one people are talking about. Do you believe one or the other? They're so wrong on that. This is not a one-on-one. There is no obligation on the part of the defense to present any kind of statement whatsoever. The burden of proof is on the people beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant, you cannot infer or anything if the defendant chooses not to testify. And finally, who's in the courtroom today? Alvin Bragg again, squeezing into one of those pews because he knows his career is over. He knows this case is a loser. He knows that as weak as this jury looks in terms of a jury that is going to stand up and say, we don't believe this, they know they've got nothing. Nobody's put a finger on Donald Trump. And finally, to put the nail on the coffin for Michael Cohen, how dare you tape record a client? That is an ethical violation, and that is an attorney-client violation. And by the way, what you recorded is meaningless. It's not even a crime. You're stupid, too.
And finally.
And that's the end of it.
You're still going to make me a cheesecake?
Yeah.
All right. Up next, Donald Trump gets a rock star reception in a blue state, while Sleepy Joe gets clobbered in the polls. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You won't get it anywhere else.